My name is Sarah. I'm 24 years old. And the story I'm about to tell you is the one I never thought I'd have the courage to share out loud. Because for a long time, I convinced myself it wasn't that bad. I told myself that parents make mistakes, that families are complicated, that maybe I was being too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. But then I almost died. And in the hours after I came back, the truth about the people who were supposed to love me most became impossible to ignore. So here it is. All of it. It started on a Tuesday evening. I'd been feeling off all day. A dull, nagging ache on my lower right side that I kept brushing off. I figured it was gas or something I ate, or just one of those random pains your body throws at you for no reason. I finished my work, made dinner, watched a little TV, and went to bed. At 2 a.m., I woke up screaming. Not from a nightmare. From pain so intense, so sudden, so absolutely crushing that my body just reacted before my brain even caught up. I rolled off my bed and hit the floor. I couldn't stand. I couldn't breathe properly. I was sweating through my clothes, shaking so hard my teeth were chattering, and all I could do was crawl toward the bathroom like that was somehow going to help. I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at myself in the mirror. My face was pale. My lips were gray. I looked like I was already leaving. I knew. In that deep, animal part of your brain that doesn't lie, I knew something was catastrophically wrong inside my body. I grabbed my phone off the floor and called my mom. It rang.
And rang. And rang.
No answer. I called again. Nothing. I called my dad. Voicemail. Mom again. Dad again.
Mom.
Dad.
Mom. Dad.
My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tap the screen. I was lying flat on my kitchen floor at this point, phone pressed against my ear, listening to the same voicemail greeting I had heard my entire life. You've reached Khalid. Leave a message. I left 3 voicemails for my dad, each one more desperate than the last. In the final one, I was crying so hard I'm not even sure the words came out clearly. I said, Dad, I think something is really wrong. I think I'm dying. Please pick up. Please come. I called 17 times total. Not one call was answered. What happened next, I only know because the paramedics explained it to me afterward. My neighbor, a quiet woman in her 60s named Mrs. Gilani, who I had maybe exchanged 20 words with in the entire year I'd lived in that building, heard me through the wall. She heard me collapse. She heard the silence that followed, and she called 911. By the time the ambulance arrived, I was barely conscious. The paramedics told me later that my appendix had ruptured. They said that if another 30 minutes had passed on that kitchen floor without intervention, the outcome would have been very different. They didn't say the word death. They didn't have to. I understood exactly what they meant. I was rushed into emergency surgery, and on that operating table, my heart stopped. I flatlined. The surgical team brought me back. But for a brief, terrifying moment, I was gone. I didn't see a white light. I didn't hear any voices or music or anything cinematic like that. What I remember is a deep, total silence. The kind of quiet that has no edges. And then suddenly noise. Machines. Someone calling my name. An unbearable pressure on my chest from the compressions. I was back. When I woke up in the recovery room, I was confused and groggy and everything hurt. A nurse was sitting beside me. The first thing I asked her was whether my parents had come. She gave me a look I will never forget for the rest of my life. It wasn't pity, exactly. It was something more complicated than that. Something careful. She told me that my emergency contacts had been notified and that someone had shown up at the hospital. But before she could finish explaining, my surgeon walked in, Dr. Ahmed, a calm, steady man with tired eyes, and he pulled a chair directly up to my bed and sat down. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a routine post-surgery update. He said, Sarah, you had a very serious night. We almost lost you. I nodded. I already knew that part. And then he said something I was completely unprepared for. He told me that a woman claiming to be my mother had come to the hospital, and that she had attempted to have me discharged. I stared at him. I genuinely thought I had misheard him.
Discharged.
I had just flatlined on an operating table, and my mother had tried to have me discharged. He held my gaze and continued. He told me the nurses had refused. They explained that discharging me in my condition could cost me my life. He told me that her response to that information was to ask whether there was paperwork she could sign to override the medical decision. The room felt like it tilted. He then paused and said, "But the man who paid your bill." And before he could finish that sentence, the door to my room opened. Standing in the doorway was a man I had never seen before in my life. He looked to be in his mid-50s, broad-shouldered, simple gray jacket, dark trousers. He had kind eyes, the sort of eyes that carry weight without being heavy, if that makes any sense. He didn't look important or powerful at first glance. He looked like someone's quiet, steady, completely dependable father. He stepped inside slowly, almost hesitantly, like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. Dr. Ahmed stood up, nodded at him respectfully, and quietly excused himself from the room. The man sat down in the chair. He folded his hands. He told me his name was Gerald. He said he had been at the hospital that night visiting his own brother on a different floor when he overheard the commotion at the front desk. He said a woman, my mother, had been loudly insisting that the staff release me because her other daughter's wedding event was in the morning and the entire family needed to be home and rested. The nurses had refused. My mother had escalated. Gerald watched the whole thing from 20 feet away, a complete stranger, and he said something shifted in him that he couldn't quite explain. He quietly asked a nurse what was happening with the patient in question. The nurse couldn't share details, but Gerald saw enough. He saw that no family member went to sit with me. He saw my mother leave the building. He walked to the billing desk. He learned that my insurance had a gap that was creating an administrative hold on my continued care. Without that hold being cleared, there could be delays. Interruptions. In a post-surgical critical care situation, those interruptions matter. So Gerald, a man whose last name I didn't even know yet, paid my hospital bill.
Just like that.
No announcement. No hesitation. A stranger made sure I stayed alive. I didn't have words. I just started crying. Not softly, the ugly, broken kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep that you normally keep completely locked away. Gerald didn't try to stop me or tell me everything was fine. He just sat there quietly, which was exactly the right thing to do. My parents came later that afternoon. My mom's opening explanation was that her phone had been on silent. 17 calls. She said she hadn't heard them. She then glanced around the room and asked about the flower arrangement on the windowsill. Gerald had left it before going back upstairs to his brother. I told her a stranger had brought it. She said, "That's strange." She never asked why a stranger was involved at all. My dad stood near the door for the entire visit with his arms crossed, nodding at whatever my mom said, never once sitting down beside me. They stayed 40 minutes. They left because, as my mom explained, there was still cleanup to finish from the morning event. She told me my sister had a beautiful day. She said I would have loved it. I lay in that hospital bed after they left, and I made a decision. Quietly, clearly, without anger, without drama. I decided I was done shrinking myself to fit inside spaces that were never actually built for me. Gerald visited me 2 more times before I was discharged. On the last visit, he brought his wife, a warm, gentle woman named Patricia, who held my hand and said something I think about every single day. She said, "You have people, sweetheart. You just haven't met all of them yet." I found out later that Gerald had also formally reported my mother's discharge attempt to the hospital's patient advocacy office. He never mentioned it to me himself. He wasn't the kind of man who needed credit for doing the right thing. He just did it. I am fully recovered now. My relationship with my parents is something I am still carefully navigating. But the fog has lifted on who they have always been versus who I needed them to be. Those are 2 very different things. And for a long time, I confused them. Gerald and Patricia are people I now genuinely consider family, real family. The kind defined by action and presence, not by blood and obligation. If this story reached you today, I want you to remember something. The people who show up for you in your darkest moments, even strangers, even quietly, even without being asked, those are the people who show you what love is actually supposed to look like. And sometimes, Nearly losing your life is the thing that finally shows you whose hands were never really holding you to begin with.